The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched out like a metal canyon. Hundreds of alien beings sat in their assigned seats, their voices mixing together in a sound that reminded Minho Kim of angry bees. He sat straight in his chair, wearing his best diplomatic uniform, trying not to show how tired he felt. 50 years. That's how long humans had been coming to this place, asking for the same basic things. The right to mine asteroids. The right to build colonies. The right to trade freely. Simple requests that other species took for granted. But for humans, every small permission required months of debate and usually ended in rejection. The Vorthak representative stood up from his seat. His purple skin gleamed under the artificial lights, and his four arms moved as he spoke. "The human request is unreasonable," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall's speakers. "They want access to the Kepler belt systems. These are valuable mining areas. Why should we give them to a species that has contributed so little to galactic civilization?" Minho felt his jaw tighten. Contributed so little? Humans had shared their medical knowledge freely. They had helped design new types of engines that used less fuel. They had even solved food shortages on 3 different worlds. But somehow, none of that mattered when it came time to vote. Hyejin Park sat next to him, her tablet showing the mining rights treaty she had worked on for 2 years. Every word had been carefully chosen. Every clause had been reviewed by dozens of legal experts. The document would give humans access to just 3 asteroid belts in neutral space. Not even the good ones with rare metals, just enough to help their 7 home systems grow a little. "Perhaps the humans should focus on learning their place among the civilized species," said the Zaloni delegate. His snake-like head swayed as he spoke, and Minho could hear amusement in his voice. Not every species is meant for expansion. Several aliens made sounds that Minho had learned meant laughter. The Karathi delegate's tentacles wiggled with what passed for humor among his people. The Nexari representative's crystals chimed in a pattern that meant agreement. Captain Jaewon Lee watched from the observation deck above. His ship was docked at the station, officially there to provide security for the human delegation. Really, he was there because the council insisted that humans needed an escort, like they were children who might get lost. His fingers drummed against the railing as he watched his people being humiliated once again. Dr. Soman Choi sat in the science advisor section, quietly closing her research files. She had spent 30 years studying alien biology, learning how different species thought and communicated. Her work had helped prevent 3 wars and saved millions of lives. But when she tried to speak at scientific conferences, other researchers treated her like a student presenting her first project. The Vorthak representative was still talking. "Humans are aggressive. They multiply too quickly. They consume resources without thought for the future. The Council must consider what will happen if we allow them to spread beyond their current boundaries." Minho stood up slowly. The hall grew quieter as he walked to the speaking platform. He had given this same speech before, with different words but the same meaning. "Please, let us live. Let us grow. Let us be part of something bigger than ourselves." "Honored council members," he began, his voice steady despite the anger burning in his chest. "Humanity asks for very little. We have followed every law, respected every boundary, and contributed to galactic peace for 5 decades. The Kepler belt systems are unclaimed territory. No species lives there. No one mines there. We simply ask for the right to build a future for our children." The Vorthak delegate interrupted him. "Your children will become our problems. Humans breed like pests. In 100 years, you will demand more systems. In 200 years, you will challenge established powers. Better to contain the infection now." Infection. The word hit Minho like a physical blow. He had been called many things over the years. Primitive, warlike, short-sighted. But never before had someone called his entire species a disease. Admiral Young-Ho Nam's face appeared on the main screen, broadcasting from Earth's orbital command center. His weathered features showed no emotion, but Minho had known the Admiral long enough to see the cold fury in his eyes. "Ambassador Kim," he said quietly, "I think we have our answer." The vote was a formality. 237 species voted to reject the human proposal. 18 voted in favor. Most of those 18 were species that humans had helped in the past, small powers with little influence. Their support meant everything and nothing at the same time. Hyejin Park closed her tablet with a soft click. 2 years of work, gone. Not just her work, but the hopes of billions of humans living in overcrowded systems, dreaming of new worlds to call home. The council moved on to the next item on their agenda as if nothing important had happened. Trade disputes between the Karathi and the Nexari, mining rights for the Zaloni in the Outer Spiral, routine business that would be approved without debate because it involved the right species. Minho walked back to his seat and began packing his belongings. Diplomatic gifts that had taken months to select and transport. Cultural exchanges that no one wanted. Scientific data that would be filed away and forgotten. Dr. Choi joined him, her research materials tucked under her arm. 30 years, she said quietly. 30 years of trying to build bridges, and they still see us as invaders. Captain Lee came down from the observation deck, his expression grim. "The ship is ready to depart whenever you are, Ambassador." Admiral Nam's image was still on the screen, watching the council debate Karathi trading routes. His voice came through, their private communication channel, calm and final. "Pack everything. We're done asking for permission." Minho nodded and picked up the human delegation's banner, the blue and white flag that had flown in this hall for 50 years. Behind him, aliens celebrated what they thought was humanity's final defeat. They laughed and congratulated each other on keeping the dangerous humans contained. None of them noticed the small smile on Admiral Nam's face as the human delegation walked out of the Galactic Council for the last time. They had just made the biggest mistake in galactic history, and they didn't even know it yet. 2 years had passed since the human delegation walked out of the Galactic Council. At first, the alien species barely noticed anything different. Human ships still moved along the major trade routes. Human stations still processed cargo and provided services. Human colonies still sent their regular reports to the galactic database, but Fleet Commander Jisoo Yoon knew the truth. From her command ship hidden in the shadow of a dead moon, she watched as the greatest migration in human history began. It started small. A few cargo ships would leave dock and never return to their scheduled routes. A research vessel would file a flight plan to survey an asteroid field and then vanish from all tracking systems. The aliens who bothered to notice assumed these were simple mechanical failures or navigation errors. Space was dangerous after all. Ships disappeared all the time. They had no idea that every single disappearance was carefully planned and perfectly executed. Chief Engineer Dongyuk Shin stood on the bridge of Orbital Station 7, watching his teams work with quiet efficiency. They had been dismantling the station piece by piece for 3 months, but to outside observers, everything looked normal. The lights still worked, the docking bays still accepted ships, the communication arrays still broadcast routine messages. What the aliens couldn't see was that every valuable component was being carefully removed and loaded onto unmarked transport ships. The quantum processors that ran the station's computers, the advanced manufacturing equipment in the workshops, even the hydroponic gardens that grew fresh food for visiting crews. By the time anyone realized what was happening, there would be nothing left but an empty shell floating in space, a Vorthak. Trade vessel requested docking permission, and Dongyuk granted it with the same professional courtesy he had always shown. The purple-skinned captain probably assumed he would be doing business with this station for years to come. He had no way of knowing that in 2 weeks, the station would be gone completely. Director Seung-hwan Bai sat in his office on New Seoul, the largest human colony outside the home system. His wall screens showed dozens of data streams, but the information they displayed told a story that no alien intelligence service could read. Ships departing on schedule but never arriving at their destinations. Cargo manifests that didn't match what was actually being transported. Communication logs that looked normal but contained hidden codes. For 50 years, humans had been the galaxy's most reliable record keepers. They documented everything, filed every report, and maintained perfect databases. Now that same attention to detail was being used to hide the biggest secret in galactic history. Dr. Yoonji Won closed her laboratory for the last time, looking around at the empty shelves where her life's work had once been stored. She had spent 15 years developing new medical treatments in partnership with alien scientists. The Karathi had benefited from her research into cellular regeneration. The Nexari had used her discoveries to cure a genetic disease that had plagued their species for centuries. None of them knew that she was taking her research with her. Not just the published papers that they could find in any database, but the real breakthrough discoveries that she had never shared, the treatments that could extend life by decades, the gene therapies that could repair damage from radiation or toxins, the diagnostic tools that could detect diseases years before symptoms appeared. The aliens had grown dependent on human innovation without realizing it. They assumed that human knowledge would always be freely available, like water from a tap that would never run dry. Soon they would learn what happened when the tap was turned off. Trader Captain Minji Han made her final delivery to the Galactic Council station. Her cargo hold was full of luxury goods from human worlds, items that had become popular among alien elites, handcrafted jewelry from Earth's artisan colonies, rare spices grown in carefully controlled environments, entertainment media that told uniquely human stories. She walked through the station's corridors one last time, nodding politely to the aliens she passed. Some of them had become friends over the years. They would probably wonder what happened to her when she stopped making her regular runs. Maybe they would even miss her. At the council chambers, she delivered a small package to the reception desk. "For the council secretary," she said with a smile. "A farewell gift from humanity." The alien clerk, a young Zaloni with bright green scales, accepted the package without much interest. He probably assumed it was another diplomatic gesture, meaningless politeness from a species that was learning to accept its place in the galaxy. Inside the package was a single data crystal containing humanity's final message to the Galactic Council. It would be discovered in a few days, when someone finally bothered to scan the contents. By then, Minji would be light years away, following the same hidden routes that thousands of other human ships had taken. The message was simple and direct, recorded by Admiral Young-ho Nam himself. "We tried peace. We offered cooperation. You chose dominance. We choose freedom. Good luck managing the galaxy without us." 6 months later, the disappearances could no longer be ignored. Every human ship, station, and outpost outside the original 7 systems had vanished without a trace. Long-range sensors detected nothing. Hyperspace communication arrays received only silence when they tried to contact human facilities. The Vorthak Empire sent investigation teams to the last known positions of human stations. They found empty space where bustling facilities had operated for decades. No debris, no distress signals, no clues about where thousands of structures and millions of people had gone. The Karathi tried to track human ships through hyperspace, using the same navigation beacons that had guided galactic trade for centuries. The trails simply ended at the edge of known space, as if the ships had sailed off the map of the universe itself. For the first time in galactic history, an entire spacefaring species had simply vanished, not destroyed in a war, not wiped out by disease or disaster. They had packed up their entire civilization and walked away from everything they had built over 5 decades. The alien species initially celebrated, believing they had successfully driven off an unwanted competitor. The Galactic Council held special sessions to redistribute human territories and assets. Trade agreements were rewritten to eliminate human involvement. Military planners updated their maps to show the former human systems as unclaimed space. None of them realized that they had just released something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, humanity was no longer asking for permission to exist. They were building something new, something unprecedented, something that would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. The aliens had taught them that peace had a price. Now they were about to learn what compound interest looked like when calculated by a species with nothing left to lose. 5 years after humanity vanished from the galaxy, Trade Administrator Kyungmin Lim's warnings began to come true. He had tried to tell the Galactic Council that humans handled 23% of all shipping between star systems. Nobody had listened then. They were listening now. The first crisis hit the Outer Rim colonies. Cargo ships that used to arrive every 2 weeks now came every month, if they came at all. The routes that human traders had maintained with clockwork precision fell apart without their steady presence. Alien captains tried to fill the gaps, but they charged twice as much and delivered half as often. On the industrial world of Kepler Prime, factories began shutting down production lines. The Nexari who owned the facilities couldn't understand why their costs had tripled overnight. They had always assumed that shipping was just something that happened, like gravity or sunlight. Now they learned that efficient logistics required experience, planning, and dedication that other species had never bothered to develop. The Vorthak Empire faced a different kind of problem. Their automated defense systems, which protected hundreds of worlds from asteroid impacts and space debris, started failing one by one. Warning lights flashed red in control centers across their territory as quantum processors burned out and couldn't be replaced. Systems analyst Hanbit Park had designed those processors during the early years of human-alien cooperation. He had built them with typical human over-engineering, making them far more reliable than anything the Vorthak could have created themselves. But he had also built them with dependencies that required regular maintenance using specific techniques that only humans understood. The Vorthak engineers tried to reverse engineer the failed components, but human technology was like a puzzle, with missing pieces. They could see what each part did, but they couldn't understand why it worked or how to fix it when it broke. Within 6 months, 3 Vorthak worlds suffered major asteroid strikes because their defense grids had gone offline. The agricultural crisis started quietly and spread like a slow plague. Dr. Nayong Jung had revolutionized food production for 17 different species during her 30-year career. Her bioengineered crop strains could grow in harsh conditions, resist diseases, and produce 3 times more food per acre than traditional plants. The alien farmers had been happy to use her seeds without understanding the science behind them. They planted the crops, harvested the results, and assumed the miracle would continue forever. But Dr. Jung's plants required specific nutrients and growing conditions that she had never fully documented. Without her guidance, the enhanced crops began failing. The Karathi were the first to experience widespread hunger. Their homeworld had supported 2 billion people using Jung's agricultural techniques. When the enhanced grain crops started producing smaller yields, they had no backup plan. Food riots broke out in major cities as prices doubled, then tripled. The Zaloni tried to help by sharing their own food supplies, but they were facing similar problems. Their fruit orchards, modified by human genetic engineering, were producing bitter, inedible harvests. The careful balance of soil chemistry and atmospheric conditions that Dr. Jung had established was falling apart without constant adjustment. Even more disturbing were the reports coming from deep space exploration missions. The Zaloni had always been the galaxy's best scouts, mapping new star systems and searching for habitable worlds. But now their long-range missions were bringing back data that made no sense. Scout Captain Woo Jin Kim had led the last human survey expedition before the Exodus. His route had taken him to the edge of the galaxy, where stars were sparse and space was mostly empty. The Zaloni decided to retrace his path, hoping to understand what humans had been looking for in such a desolate region. They found Kim's sensor buoys still functioning after 5 years, their nuclear power sources designed to last for decades. But the data the buoys were collecting was impossible to interpret. Massive energy signatures appeared and disappeared in supposedly empty space. Gravitational readings suggested the presence of objects the size of small moons, but visual scans showed nothing but darkness. Most troubling were the hyperspace distortions. The fabric of space itself seemed to be bending and twisting in patterns that suggested massive construction projects. But construction of what? And by whom? Intelligence. Chief Yeben Chai spent her days piecing together fragments of information from across the galaxy. Her office walls were covered with star charts, shipping reports, and sensor data from dozens of different sources. The picture that emerged made her lose sleep at night. The humans hadn't retreated to their 7 home systems as everyone assumed. Deep space listening posts had detected no communications traffic from those worlds in over 2 years. Long-range sensors couldn't penetrate the defensive screens that surrounded human space, but the energy readings suggested that something major was happening there as well. More concerning were the resource calculations. Before their disappearance, humans had been mining asteroids and processing raw materials at a steady rate. The amount of metal, rare elements, and energy they had extracted over 5 decades was enormous. But they had built relatively few ships and stations compared to other species of similar size. That meant they had been stockpiling resources for years, possibly decades. Enough raw materials to build a fleet that would dwarf anything in known space. Enough rare elements to power technologies that existed only in theoretical research papers. Enough energy storage capacity to run projects on a scale that no species had ever attempted. The galaxy's intelligence services began sharing information for the first time in centuries, driven by a growing fear that they had underestimated humanity's capabilities. The species that had dismissed humans as primitive and short-sighted were slowly realizing that they had been systematically outmaneuvered by opponents they had never taken seriously. Reconnaissance missions sent to the galactic edge reported increasingly strange phenomena. Space itself seemed to be under construction in vast regions where no stars existed. Energy patterns suggested the presence of artificial structures spanning multiple light years. Hyperspace routes that had been stable for millions of years were shifting as if something massive was altering the fundamental geometry of the universe. The aliens had spent 5 years congratulating themselves on successfully removing humanity from galactic affairs. Now they were beginning to understand that they hadn't defeated their opponents. They had simply given them the privacy and motivation to build something that would make their previous efforts look like children's toys. In the darkness between stars, humanity was no longer bound by alien laws or diplomatic restrictions. They were creating something unprecedented, something that would force the galaxy to reconsider everything it thought it knew about power, technology, and the price of underestimating those you choose to oppress. 10 years after humanity's exodus, a Corvani exploration fleet made a discovery that would haunt the galaxy's nightmares for generations to come. Captain Threx had been following strange energy readings for 3 months, chasing signals that appeared on sensors but made no logical sense according to known physics. The readings had started as whispers in deep space monitoring stations. Faint energy signatures that appeared and disappeared like ghosts in the void. But as more ships investigated, the signals grew stronger and more frequent. Something was happening in the empty regions between spiral arms, where no sane species would ever build anything. Commander Siwu Jiang had filed his final report from that exact region 15 years earlier, during humanity's last official deep space survey mission. His data had seemed worthless at the time, full of measurements that didn't match any known stellar phenomena. The Galactic Council had filed his report away and forgotten about it, assuming it was human incompetence or equipment failure. Now, the Corvani were following Jang's old coordinates, and what they found broke their understanding of what was possible in the universe. The first sign was a gravity well that shouldn't exist. Captain Threx's navigation computers kept trying to plot courses around a massive object, but visual scans showed only empty space. Long-range sensors detected gravitational effects consistent with something the size of a large planet, but there was nothing visible to create such distortion. As they moved closer, the impossible became undeniable. Structures began appearing. On their screens, not built around stars or planets, but floating free in the void. Massive constructions that stretched for thousands of kilometers, connected by energy bridges that pulsed with power signatures beyond anything in the galactic database. The Corvani scout ship's sensors couldn't process what they were seeing. Artificial worlds hung in perfect formation, each one larger than the biggest space stations ever built. Industrial complexes the size of moons manufactured materials using processes that violated the laws of thermodynamics. Defensive installations that looked like metal flowers bloomed from structures that seemed to bend space itself. But it wasn't the scale that terrified Captain Threx and his crew. It was the technology, energy readings that showed power generation, equivalent to entire stars. Materials that reflected sensor beams in patterns that suggested they existed partially outside normal spacetime. Weapons platforms that seemed to manipulate gravity itself as a tool for construction and defense. The truth became clear as they detected more structures in the distance. This wasn't a single installation or even a cluster of facilities. It was a network spanning multiple star systems, a civilization built in the galactic void where no other species had ever dared to venture. Xenoarchaeologist Sunwoo Lee had left behind research notes before humanity's departure, studies of ancient ruins that other species had dismissed as natural rock formations. His reports had suggested that these weren't random geological features, but the remains of something incredibly old and advanced. Most alien scientists had ignored his theories, considering them the fantasies of a primitive mind trying to find patterns where none existed. Now those same scientists realized that Lee had been right about everything. The ancient ruins were indeed the remnants of a precursor civilization, one that had built technologies beyond current understanding. And somehow, impossibly, the humans had figured out how to use that knowledge. The scout ship's passive sensors detected massive vessels moving between the installations. These weren't the cramped, resource-limited ships that the galaxy remembered from humanity's departure. These were leviathans that dwarfed the largest alien dreadnoughts, moving with impossible grace through space that should have torn them apart with gravitational forces. Captain Threx tried to maintain his distance, but human technology had advanced, far beyond Corvani's stealth capabilities. A voice spoke through his ship's communication system, speaking perfect Corvani, despite humanity's supposed isolation from galactic affairs. Corvani vessel, you are trespassing in restricted space. Identify yourself and state your purpose. The voice belonged to Admiral Daehoon Park, though he sounded older and somehow different from the man who had served as humanity's naval attaché decades earlier. There was a confidence in his tone that spoke of absolute power held with casual ease. "This is Captain Threx of the Corvani exploration ship Windcutter," came the nervous reply. "We are conducting a scientific survey of this region. We had no knowledge that this space was claimed by any faction." A pause, then something that might have been amusement in Park's voice. "Claimed? Captain, we didn't claim this space. We built it. Every structure you see, every world you detect, every defensive installation that's currently tracking your ship, we made it all from raw materials and ancient knowledge that the galaxy thought was worthless." The communication channel filled with sensor data that made the Corvani crew stare in disbelief. Detailed scans of their own ship, down to the individual components in their life support systems. Analysis of their hull composition, their power, generation, their weapons capability. information that should have been impossible to gather from such a distance. "You taught us something valuable 10 years ago," Admiral Park continued. "You taught us that peace has a price, and that price includes compound interest. We've been calculating what the galaxy owes us for 50 years of humiliation, rejection, and contempt." More human ships appeared on the Corvani sensors, emerging from what had seemed like empty space. Not the handful of vessels that might be expected from a deep space patrol, but dozens of massive constructions that moved like living things through dimensions that normal ships couldn't access. The largest vessel positioned itself directly in front of the wind cutter, and Captain Threx finally understood the true scale of what humanity had built. The ship was bigger than some asteroids, its hull gleaming with materials that seemed to absorb and redirect light in impossible ways. Weapons that looked more like art installations covered its surface, beautiful and terrible in their obvious power. "Return to your people," Admiral Park said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Tell them what you've seen here. Tell them that humanity remembers every insult, every rejection, every time we were told to know our place. Tell them we've learned our place, and it's not where they put us." The communication ended, and the human ships faded back into invisibility, as suddenly as they had appeared. The Corvani scout ship found itself alone again in what seemed like empty space. But Captain Threx would never again believe that emptiness meant safety. The galaxy's most advanced species had just discovered that they were no longer at the top of the technological hierarchy. Somewhere in the void, humanity had become something beyond their understanding, something that made their own achievements look like primitive attempts at civilization. The children who had been dismissed from the galactic community had grown up in exile, and now they were ready to return home. 15 years after walking away from galactic civilization, humanity returned. But they were no longer the same species that had left in frustration and anger. Admiral Taehyung Kang led the first human fleet to enter galactic space in over a decade. His flagship, the New Earth, moved through hyperspace in ways that made alien physicists question everything they thought they knew about faster-than-light travel. The ship seemed to slide between dimensions, appearing and disappearing from sensors as if it existed in multiple realities at once. Behind him came vessels that defied classification. Some looked like flowing metal sculptures that changed shape as they moved. Others resembled crystalline formations that pulsed with internal light. A few appeared to be made of pure energy, held together by forces that created their own gravitational fields. The Galactic Council received humanity's message 3 days before the fleet arrived. It was simple and direct, delivered by President Ji-young Choi from what had once been the bridge of a human diplomatic vessel. Now the same space had been transformed into something that looked more like a garden than a command center, with living walls that grew computer displays and furniture that adapted to whoever was using it. "We're coming home," President Choi announced to the galaxy. "We have gifts to share and stories to tell. We hope you're ready to listen this time." The galaxy's response was predictable and catastrophic. Fear made the alien species do what they had always done when faced with something they didn't understand. They tried to destroy it. The Vorthak Empire launched the first attack, sending their most powerful battle fleet to intercept the human ships before they could reach the inner systems. 300 vessels armed with planet-killing weapons moved to eliminate what they saw as an existential threat to galactic stability. Captain Yeonsu Park commanded the human vessel Harmony, a ship that looked more like a work of art than a weapon of war. When the Vorthak fleet opened fire with enough destructive power to crack a moon, she responded with what appeared to be curiosity rather than alarm. The energy beams that should have vaporized her ship simply passed through it as if the Harmony existed in a different layer of reality. Missiles that could destroy space stations harmlessly exploded against shields that converted the attacks into useful energy for the ship's systems. Captain Park's response wasn't a counterattack in any traditional sense. She simply activated what her crew called a gravity lens, a device that treated space itself like a tool to be shaped and molded. The Vorthak fleet found their own weapons redirected back at them with surgical precision, disabling engines and life support systems without destroying a single ship. Within minutes, 300 of the galaxy's most advanced warships were floating helplessly in space, their crews unharmed but completely powerless. Not a single human ship had fired a weapon, yet the most feared military force in known space had been neutralized with what looked like casual effort. Fleet Marshal Jihoon Lim watched the encounter from his command vessel, the Infinite Dawn. He wasn't conducting a war in any traditional sense. This was education, a demonstration of what humanity had become during their years in exile. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy as other species tried to stop the human return by force. The Karathi sent swarms of fast attack ships that found themselves trapped in bubbles of altered time, moving so slowly that their crews experienced minutes while hours passed in the outside world. The Nexari deployed experimental weapons that manipulated matter at the quantum level, only to watch in amazement as human ships absorbed the attacks and used them to repair minor damage to their hulls. None of the human responses were designed to kill or conquer. Every action served to demonstrate a simple truth. The species that had once begged for mining rights in empty asteroid belts now possessed technology that made galactic military power look like children playing with toys. Diplomat So-Young Kim, great-niece of the ambassador who had walked out of the council chambers 15 years earlier, requested permission to address the Galactic Council. She arrived not in a traditional shuttle, but in a vessel that seemed to be grown rather than built, its organic curves and flowing lines suggesting life rather than mere technology. The council chambers had been rebuilt twice since humanity's departure, but they still followed the same basic design. Hundreds of species in their assigned seats, their voices mixing in the familiar sound of political debate. But now that sound carried an undertone of fear that had never existed before. So-Young walked to the speaking platform with the same dignity. Her great-uncle had shown decades earlier, but where he had pleaded for acceptance, she came offering evolution. "We didn't return for revenge," she told the assembled aliens, her voice carrying clearly through translation systems that were somehow more accurate than they had been before humanity left. "We came back because we found something in the void that you need to understand. We found others." She activated a holographic display that showed star maps unlike anything the Council had ever seen. Vast networks of civilizations existing in the spaces between spiral arms, species that had been refugees and outcasts from their own galaxies, all working together to build something greater than any individual world or empire. "We learned that the galaxy you know is just one small part of a much larger community," So-Young continued. "There are thousands of species out there who left their home regions for the same reasons we did. They were rejected, oppressed, or simply tired of small, thinking in smaller dreams." Dr. Chanwu Yang stepped forward, his medical scanner analyzing the health of every being in the chamber simultaneously. The data he displayed showed genetic diseases that had plagued alien species for millennia, conditions that human medicine could now cure with simple treatments. "We can extend your lifespans by centuries," he announced. "We can repair genetic damage, cure diseases, and eliminate the biological limitations that have held your species back. All we ask in return is that you stop thinking so small." Engineer Boram Seo demonstrated how human technology could restore dead worlds, create new ones from raw asteroids, or modify existing planets to support different types of life. The power to reshape entire solar systems was now as routine to humanity as building roads had been to their ancestors. President Choi stood before the rebuilt Galactic Council with an offer that would define the next 1,000 years of galactic history. "Join us," she said simply. "Help us build something worthy of intelligent life. Or stay here and watch the universe pass you by." The choice was no longer between war and peace, but between growth and stagnation. The species that had once rejected humanity's plea for a few asteroid belts were now being invited to join a community that spanned multiple galaxies. Some would accept, others would refuse and fade into irrelevance, but the galaxy would never. Again, underestimate the power of outcasts who refuse to accept the limitations that others try to impose on them. Humanity had learned the most important lesson in the universe. Sometimes the greatest mercy is being ignored by those you've wronged, because it gives you the freedom to become something they could never have imagined.